There's one fighter on UFC Freedom 250 carrying more pressure than anybody else on the card. Not Alex Pereira, not Ilya Topuria, not Cyril Gane. The fighter who needs this win the most is Derrick Lewis. And honestly, it's not even close. Because while other fighters are chasing titles, Derrick Lewis is fighting for something much harder to get back. Momentum. At this stage of his career, every fight feels bigger, every loss feels heavier, and every win suddenly becomes proof that there's still life left in the tank. That's why Freedom 250 might be the most important night Derrick Lewis has had in years. Let's be real. Derrick Lewis has already done enough to secure his place in UFC history. He owns the UFC record for most knockout victories in company history with 16 knockouts. He's headlined major cards. He fought for an undisputed title. He fought for an interim title. He's delivered some of the most memorable knockouts and interviews the sport has ever seen. His legacy is secure, but legacy and relevance are two different things. And right now, relevance is what's on the line. That's the uncomfortable reality. The heavyweight division never stops moving. New contenders arrive every year. Younger fighters get faster, more athletic, more complete. Meanwhile, Lewis is fighting a different battle, Father Time, and Father Time has never lost a fight. That's what makes this matchup so important. Because a win doesn't just give Lewis another number in the win column. It gives him another reason to believe, another reason for fans to believe, another reason for the UFC to keep putting him in meaningful fights. But what happens if he loses? That's where things get complicated, because fans have started asking a question they never used to ask. Is Derrick Lewis still a contender? A few years ago, that question sounded ridiculous. Today, it's a real conversation, and that's why the pressure is enormous. Quick question. How many fighters can lose multiple rounds and still feel one punch away from victory? Very few. Lewis is one of them. That's why opponents never relax against him. You can dominate the fight. You can win every minute. Then suddenly Lewis lands something clean and the entire night changes. We've seen it happen too many times. Alexander Volkov learned that lesson. Curtis Blades learned that lesson. Countless heavyweights learned that lesson. That power changes everything. But power alone isn't always enough. That's been the story of Lewis's recent years. The division evolved. Heavyweights became more technical. Movement improved. Wrestling improved. Game plans improved. And Lewis started running into fighters who could avoid the chaos. That's dangerous when your biggest weapon is chaos itself. Which brings us back to Freedom 250. This fight feels like a crossroads. Not retirement, not necessarily, but a crossroads. Because if Lewis wins impressively, the conversation changes immediately. People start talking about rankings again. People start talking about potential matchups again. People start wondering if one more run is possible. And honestly, that's not crazy. Heavyweight careers age differently. One knockout can launch a fighter back into the spotlight overnight, especially when that fighter is Derrick Lewis. Because nobody creates viral moments like Derrick Lewis. Nobody. The man can spend 10 minutes losing a fight and still walk away with the highlight everybody remembers. That kind of power keeps opportunities alive. But opportunities eventually run out. That's why this fight matters. The UFC loves stars. The UFC loves knockout artists. The UFC loves personalities. Lewis checks every box. But the UFC also loves winners. And eventually, you have to keep winning to stay near the front of the line. That's where Lewis finds himself now. Not fighting for a title. Not fighting for a belt. Fighting to prove he still belongs in meaningful heavyweight conversations. And honestly, there's something fascinating about that. Because pressure creates strange moments. Some fighters crumble. Some fighters rise. Lewis has spent most of his career doing the second. Think about how many times fans counted him out. Think about how many times analysts said the younger fighter would take over. Think about how many times people said his style wouldn't work anymore. Yet somehow he kept finding ways to matter. That's why writing him off feels dangerous. Because Derrick Lewis has built an entire career around proving people wrong. And Freedom 250 gives him another chance to do exactly that. One knockout changes the narrative. One finish changes the conversation. One big moment reminds everyone why he became one of the most feared punchers in UFC history. That's what's at stake. Not legacy. His legacy is already secure. Not popularity. Fans will always love Derrick Lewis. This is about relevance. This is about whether Derrick Lewis remains a meaningful player in the heavyweight division or becomes a beloved veteran looking back on past accomplishments. That's a massive difference. And that's why I think Derrick Lewis needs this win more than anybody else on the Freedom 250 card. More than Pereira, more than Gain, more than Topuria. Because the consequences of losing are bigger for him than they are for anyone else. A win keeps the dream alive. A loss makes the road forward much harder. And at this stage of a fighter's career, that pressure is impossible to ignore. So tell me this, does Derrick Lewis have one more signature knockout left in him? Or is Freedom 250 the beginning of the end for the Black Beast?